Great to see everybody. The second council meeting in a week. How very exciting is that? And can I just say our Tuesday decision of inclusion of Māori wards into our council in 2022 has been an amazing response, and I want to acknowledge you all. And if I can just share with you the Mayor of Rotorua and her words. She is proud to say she has come from my birthplace is Hastings. What a great team, what a wonderful kaumātua standing with you. The Mayor of Whanganui, how proud we are of Hastings today. And lots of messages like that from our local people, Jacob Scott, all sorts of people, Pat Turley, people we do business with every day of the week. So it was a, pretty proud moment, and we're very proud of you all. As we start today, could we invite an opening karakia? And I haven't arranged that. Has anybody arranged our karakia? Thank you, Councillor Redstone. Thank you very much. Thank you.
May the peace and kindness of the sky above, of the Mother Earth below, and of the wall of grace and environment rest upon us and guide us whole of this life. Amen.
Our waiata today. Oh, we seem to be missing a couple of people today. Well, we can sing without the guitar. That's okay. I think that we should sing Te Aroha for our waiata. Kia ora. E tū. Apologies for absence from Councillor O'Keefe. Apologies from Councillor Barber, who's working with Three Waters Aotearoa all day today. Apologies from Councillor Harvey, and he hopes to get to the second part of today's meeting. Any leave of absence? No, I'm happy to move from the chair. Those apologies be accepted. Have a second, and Councillor Dixon. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. Conflicts of interest. I do remind councillors of the conflicts in today's agenda item to address those as they arise. Minutes of the meeting of the 6th of May. Have a mover, Councillor Watkins. Seconder, Councillor Sholem. All those in favour, please say aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. Submissions on the Consolidated Bylaw and Dog Policy 5-year review. Welcome to John Payne, the staff, Tony, and welcome to our first submitter, Eric. Lovely to have you with us today. Councillors, I will invite John Payne now to give an overview of this paper and the journey that we've been on to bring this 5-year bylaw review to the table today. And this is the part that we have the feedback from our community in terms of adoption in July. So welcome to you, John.
Thank you. Good morning. Just an overview of the process so far, because the bylaw process does actually take quite a long time. So we first kicked off in about June of 2020, and the first step was to get feedback from the internal chapter owners and the key external stakeholders. So that's the likes of Regional Council, Police, Hastings and Havelock North Business Association, Rural Community Board. That process went through to about September. We then had a council workshop on the 22nd of September where some points needed further clarification, and there were a couple of issues as well raised by councillors that should be added into the draft. So they were added, and then the draft went for a legal review in November. The report was coming back to council in December, however it was left on the table as we had concluded we hadn't consulted enough with Tamara Peak Trust. So a report ended up going to council on the 11th of February, and that included the draft bylaw, the draft dog policy and the statement of proposal. So council approved the documents and it went out to public consultation on the 12th of February. So we went through the council website, opened up the My Voice, My Choice submission process. Copies of the documents and the submission forms were delivered to the libraries. There were newspaper advertisements, and as required under the Dog Control Act, every dog owner on our register was written to personally as well about the changes. Surprisingly, we only received 31 submissions. And to tell the truth, most of the submissions are really in support of what we're doing, and also a few of them raised issues that are probably a little outside the bylaw process or the policy process. I guess an example of that is like someone submitted that the barking dog process should be included in the policy, but that's covered by legislation, so it's not required. We had one submitter who wanted to come and speak today, but had another appointment and couldn't make it, so we invited them to do a more detailed submission. That was submitted number 21, which you'll find on page 43. And we have Mr. Scott, who's come in to speak to you, and I would assume that will be the first process.
Thank you very much, John. So we don't want to keep Eric waiting, so we welcome you now to come up here, Eric, and we'd love to hear from you. Liz, have you all got a copy in front of you of Eric's submission, number 28?
Oh, okay. Yes, I would like to speak out against this. Now, I first became a dog owner in 1958. I'd always wanted to own a dog before that because I spent 16 years in the military. I wasn't able to, moving about all the time. And I had just remarried. What I didn't know was that my wife didn't like dogs. And when I said there's a dog advertised, she just said, and this was a collie, and I'd always wanted a collie. And I said, what do you think? And she said, whatever you want, you know, not wanting to upset the cart. So anyway, we went out and we found this dog, and it was a beautiful dog. It was only a young dog. And I don't know why they were giving away, but when it came to get in the car, it spread its leg. It fought like hell. It just didn't want. So it had a bad experience. And I said to my wife, I think you'd better sit in the back with it, keep it calm. And it was then I realised she was not at all pleased about it. So I was going to leave the dog, and I said, I'll get back to you. And as I went to get in the car, I looked back and I saw him, and he just looked so lonely. I said, I'll take him. So we got him, and he became a very good dog. He'd never been in town before, and I trained him, and I used to walk a lot. I used to walk around the shops and for hours, and I was getting ready to build at that time, build a house. And yeah, we just had him, and he came along very well. And I used to walk him everywhere off lead because the laws then were your dog had to be under control. And he was under control. I'd go with him. I'd go into a shop and I'd say, sit, buddy. And he would just sit there and wait until we came out. People would come along and they'd say, oh, what a nice dog. Pat him and talk to him, everything like that. Other people would say, oh, what a shame, that poor dog's been left outside to wait while someone's inside. But from my point of view, he was out and about walking with me all over the place, which was much better than sitting at home at the back of the house. And but anyway, over the years, we've had a series of dogs, because it's a long time. And we've had, when they had dogs in the library for the children, they had our two dogs there, and the kids used to love it. So much so that when the kids had a Christmas party, they asked the headmaster, could they invite the dogs? And when I got there, he said to me, I couldn't see why the kids wanted the dogs at the Christmas party. He said, now I see them, he said, I know what it's all about, and they loved it. We've also taken our dogs to old people's homes. And, I feel that this dog restriction on leads is very much dependent. Most people who take their dogs out for walks are good dog owners. Others just leave them tied up for hours and days. And I think it's unfair, because there are dogs who have attacked people on lead. There's a number of them, but there's our dogs, in all the time we've had them, our dogs have only been attacked 3 times, and that was by the same dog. And apart from that, we've had no problems. A lot of people, when I see dogs playing, some of the times they play very roughly and they grab each other by the neck and that sort of thing. But they're not really, the first time I saw it, because I hadn't on the dog before, I separated them and I called Buddy away. And the first thing he did when I let go of him was go back to this dog again. And he did it twice. And I thought, he's either stupid or he's not being hurt. So I watched them, and it did look rough, and they were making noises and everything, but he wasn't hurt, and so you've got to sort of know dogs a little bit for this. But dogs are so useful these days. They're just incredible animals, a lot better than a lot of humans. And I can tell you, I have a lot more trouble with kids, especially teenage boys, on bicycles than I do with dogs. And, and also, I might say, parked cars on footpath and people having to go off. There was another case of dogs on lead where an elderly lady, she had 2 Pekingese on these long leads, and I was trying to pass her on the footpath. And these dogs were going from one side to the other, and as I went to pass this side, the dog had come out there, so I went the other side. So a dog on lead is not necessarily a good thing. But there are people, I think actually, rather than have dogs on leads, it would be a good idea if it had things which would encourage people to train their dogs and sort of have some sort of competition. My wife does agility and various things with our dogs, and they have at least 2 walks a day. And she meets a lot of people who walk the dogs every day. And she was saying just recently that one of her friends walking the dog in the morning, she had just put her dog back on the lead in the park, and someone came over to her and gave her a couple of dog bags, back, the dog bags. And she said, "What's that for?" She said, "Because you've got your dog on the lead." And she said, "Oh." And, but there's another case, talking about a lot of it because of misbehavior of things. My wife and I, we were coming back from the supermarket, and we had bags, and we had the two dogs, and they were on leads, and we were walking in a very busy part of Tamona Road, near Heratonga Street intersection. And coming in the opposite direction were 6 young boys, about 15, with blue jerseys on and caps on. And there were three of them, one behind the other. Now, we moved off to the edge of the footpath, and the dogs were walking on the grass. They didn't dismount or come back by singly past us. They drove past and taking the whole footpath up past us. So it's not just dogs which are to blame for people's problems. And I think increasingly, the things that dogs do, they just amaze me. I think dogs are a lot more intelligent than we are at times. They can pick things up that we can't. And so I would like to carry on being in control of the dog, on or off leash. And the other thing is, I don't like being told in the park, you can't go on this sporting field. I don't play sport. I have never played sport, but I pay in my taxes rates for those parks. And if you want to walk out to throw a ball and fetch it as part of its exercise, I see no reason why that shouldn't be allowed.
Thank you very much, Eric. I mean, you raised some really valid points there. I've just got a question from Councillor Kerr for you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very thorough and thoughtful presentation. I'm just wondering, in the course of you exercising your dog and throwing the ball, has anybody come and challenged you that your dog should be on lead, or have any of our dog control officers come and waggled their finger at you and said your dog should be on lead? Or have you been able to maintain running your dog the way you wish to?
No, there have been dog control officers come up. I don't walk very much these days. I do go out for walks occasionally, but I'm 91 on Sunday, so so I don't walk as much as I used to. I used to walk a hell of a lot. And pardon, what was it about?
So I was just wondering if any of our
the dog control officers.
Dog control.
Yeah. No, one picked my wife up, and he said, your dog's off lead. And he was over, not too far away, about from here to the piano way, and he was sniffing around there, and she said, "Come, Jessa," and he came back to her and he said to her, "Oh, my dog wouldn't do that." And so instead of giving a ticket or something, he gave her a warning, a verbal warning. But no, we have been stopped about the dogs being off lead, not because they were doing anything bad, just because they were not on lead.
Yeah, very, very valid point. Thank you very much, Eric.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your submission today.
Thank you
you're
very
very welcome to stay and listen to the rest of the part of our meeting, or if you want to be doing other things out in the sun, you're free to get on with the day as well.
I've got a lot of problems with council as well, and mainly to do with footpath.
Right. Well, you come and see us another day, and you book in with my EA, and we'll get those things sorted out for you. Those footpaths, we'd love to hear about them.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Very cool.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much, Eric. And now, Council, we start going through the submissions. And what we can do is the submissions that are in support of the proposed bylaw policy, which are 3, 4, 5, 8, 12, 15 and 26, we can separate those, or we can go through each one separately. So, for your feedback, Councillor
Yeah.
Kerr.
Thank you, Worship. I just have a follow-up question with the staff regarding the submission we've just had. Is that appropriate
Yes.
that I ask now?
Yes,
Um,
it is.
I'm just interested in what the protocol would be if there was a dog, obviously under control, being walked by an elderly gentleman or elderly woman. If you could explain what would happen now. Thank you.
So generally, general ranging is something that we're directed to as a result of feedback from complaints from the community. Otherwise, we're always quite reactive to complaints generally. So if they have the luxury of being able to go to an area where they can do some general ranging, and the rule is that dogs are required to be on a lead, then any dogs that aren't on a lead, they'll speak to the people about the complaints that are being received and about what the rules and requirements are. But they'll generally do that in a pretty friendly sort of a way. There's a lot of merit in what our previous submitter said, that dogs are more aggressive when they're on a lead, but they're also more under control when they're on a lead as well. So, and I think we've got a fairly good balance in our bylaw where you can and can't go.
Thank you. Okay, so are council comfortable that we work with the submissions, or do you want to go through each one individually? You do? Each one individually. Work with the submissions, only the ones that have raised some concerns? Okay, thank you. All right, well, John, then if you could take us through. So if we look at the officer's comments on 5.1, those are the submitters in support, and now we'll work through those starting from 1 and 13 and look at those options. Thank you.
I think the first one will be at 4.3.
Okay, thank
That's
you.
the late submission that came in from the Public Spaces and Building Assets team.
Okay,
Your Worship, can I firstly recommend that we receive the late submission? Because I think as process, we should do that first.
I think it's covered off in the recommendations.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Great, thank you, John.
So that one was basically to remove the cycles referred to in 2.7, as cycles on footpaths are actually covered by a road user rule, and that road user rule is currently under review anyway. So it's a lot of times it's not a good idea to repeat legislation in a bylaw because it reduces the shelf life should the legislation change. But there were just points of clarification as well. Our district-wide reserve management plan encourages the use of cycles on reserves and things like that. And this was kind of a little bit in conflict with that. But initially, my understanding was it really was referring to roadways. But the way you read it, it probably could have been taken wider. So for any avoidance, they've just suggested removing the reference to cycles.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Councillor Nixon?
Yeah. I don't think we've got the right officers here, but my understanding is the proposal from NZTA to allow cycling on footpaths is actually.
Yes, that's in the report. So when's the second reading of that
I thought
legislation?
they'd dropped the idea.
No.
Is it still on there?
Yes? Yeah, it's in the paper.
Oh, okay.
I think it's a second reading coming up through the legislation, as I understand it. Can anyone clarify that? Mr. O'Shaughnessy?
No.
Where the legislation's at? No. We'll follow up and get back to you with
Yeah,
the
thanks.
status of that
It's
legislation.
just for accuracy.
Thank you. We'll come back to you. We'll just follow that up. Sorry? Okay, cool. Thank you. Right, okay, so that was submission
That was the late submission at 4.3.
4.3. Any questions on that submission? No? Okay, carrying on.
So the next one is 5.2.
Yes,
Submissions 1 and 13. The submitters believe that dogs should be controlled on a leash and not be banned from children's playgrounds or sports fields, in particular when they're not in use. And the officer's comments there is that there are quite limited areas where dogs are prohibited. I guess at the end of the day, we haven't prohibited them for the sake of it. We've prohibited them for reasons. And that is particularly around safety and hygiene reasons. The dogs are prohibited from children's play areas and sports fields. So not the sports park, but the actual playing sports fields where they're banned from.
thank you. Councillor Sholham.
Thank you for that. Sorry, is it standing orders?
Happy to move from the chair that standing orders, seconded by Councillor Watkins. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Any against? Thank you. No standing orders. We're waving.
Yeah, okay.
We've waved them.
Thank you. My question on this one is, can you just, and I'm sorry, I probably should have looked it up before the meeting myself, is what are the rules in an area where, say, Frimley Park, for example, where there's no defined necessarily area around the children's playground there? How does the rules work in terms of how far you've got to keep a dog away?
I think it may be written in there that it's 10 metres from any play equipment.
Right.
It kind of makes sense if it's not delineated by a fence.
Yeah.
It's just,
Yeah, because we do have a number of playgrounds within our district that aren't delineated by a fence, and I think there is confusion. Because I must admit, before my dog passed on, we used to walk down as a family to Frimley Park, and we'd sit away from the playground, but I wouldn't say it was 10 metres. So I think maybe we need to communicate that out a little more too. Maybe that's a campaign to register dog owners at some point.
you double check that.
Your Worship, if I could just comment, there is signage close to playgrounds. Please keep your dogs away from the playground as you go into most of the parks.
There is, but it's very unclear how close or far away is acceptable.
Doesn't
Set
say.
up. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
5.3 is the one I gave you an example on before about the barking process should be included in the policy, but barking's covered under the legislation. 5.4, submission 6, the submitter would like to extend the off-leash times at Ebbett Park from the proposed 5 p.m. till 8 a.m. So that had already been adjusted when we first bought the draft to allow a bit more exercise time, but we wanted to extend it to allow a bit more, but without clashing with other users of the park, in particular school children.
Any comments on Ebbett Park or the officer's comments? Councillor Nixon?
I just wondered about weekends, because the parks are used more intensively. I don't have a problem with the suggestion, but I just wonder if we should exempt weekends. Thought.
Comment on, I guess it'd be quite unenforceable. No more questions on that one. 5.5, submission 7, the submitter would like the policy to show that service dogs are exempt from complying with the provisions of the dog prohibited areas. Disability assist dogs are granted that special right, to take their dogs basically anywhere, and it's they know it, they know what the rules are, and it's covered under the Bill of Rights, Human Rights Act, and it's also under the Dog Control Act that disability assist dogs have that exemption. But we could, for the avoidance of doubt, put a statement in the policy, but as you say, it's probably not going to give much value.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Redstone?
That was actually my question was, could you add that to the statement and make it very clear? Thank you.
Okay, is everyone comfortable with that direction? Great, thank you.
Submission 9 was another one of those ones that's already covered by the legislation. Would like to see a national microchip database linked to council's dog registration. There already is one throughout the country,
Right.
and majority of councils are linked to it.
Excellent, thank you.
Submissions 10 and 21 support the bylaw, but also note that more enforcement is required. There was a little bit of a theme of that coming through, but as I've identified here, that as resources permit, we will do some proactive type work in areas that generate the most feedback from the community. But general ranging is hard to find time to be able to do.
So John, just a comment from me, are we able to those submitters, report back to them along those lines that you've just outlined there?
Yes.
That,
yes.
that, you know, as, you know, those areas of concern, there will be, you know, we are identifying areas in which we will do stronger rangering?
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Thank you.
And what we say to the complainants is, look, you're our eyes and ears out there, so we really rely on you to give us the feedback and to identify the areas you want us to concentrate in.
Excellent.
In regards to all of the submissions, we'll be looking at responding back to the submitters with the comments, the officer comments, and also the finding from council.
Excellent, thank you.
Submissions 11 and 28, dogs should be permitted off leash provided the owner has them under control. And submitter 11 said they would also like to see caged off dog exercise areas. So the comments there are, owners are expected to have their dogs under control when they're off the leash anyway, as well as on the leash. Caged areas, we've discussed that before. They're quite expensive, and sometimes they bring problem dogs to one area and you actually get a bit of dog fighting and that sort of thing. But having done surveys in the past, we've found that a lot of people who take their dogs to a caged area are ones that have problem dogs that they can't control properly. And so that's an opportunity to let them off and try and work with them. The people tend to frequent the wider open spaces more where they can keep away from perhaps some of the problem dogs. Submission number 14 at 5.9 was just simply a comment that they support the liquor ban for the Tomato Peak. 5.10, submission 16, pound fees should be flexible to determine and determined on a case-by-case basis, as sometimes the circumstances are beyond the owner's control. I think we do that anyway at the end of the day, but the policy statement says that pound fees will be set to recover costs and encourage retrieval of impounded dogs. So we've got to get that balance right, otherwise if the pound fees are too great, people just won't claim their dogs. Operational procedures to return dogs to the owner during working hours free of charge where the dog's not classified as dangerous or menacing. It's currently registered, it's not displaying any aggression or anything like that, and it's also got its registration tag. It's microchipped, and there's no record of having been previously impounded, and those fees are set by resolution each year.
Thank you.
5.11, submission 17. Submitters requested an amendment and significant reduction to the working dog fee. So we do actually have a statement in the policy already that says the fees for urban dogs will be higher than that for rural dogs. And currently the urban fee is in fact 106% higher than the rural dog fee. And the dog registration fees were set by council resolution on the 18th of March.
Thank you.
5.12, submission 18, should not fine people who have a leash with them or their dog is under control. Should penalise irresponsible dog owners only. Also, there should be more off-leash exercise areas, more like the word, I would like the word uncontrolled added to the policy 3.1 in the second bullet. Just for your information, we don't fine people for their dogs not being on a leash anyway. We do an education approach. It's not the crime of the century. It's often just about talking to people. Unless, of course, we've got repeat offenders that it's accompanied with other issues that the dog's causing. So we'd just rather have a friendly chat with them. I couldn't see that any value would be added by adding the word uncontrolled in 3.1. No questions. 513, submission number 19. The submitter would like to see 2 poo bag stations at Waimarama. So that's not part of the bylaw process, but we have already discussed that as well in regards to the distribution of those dispensers throughout the district. Submission 20, the submitter opposes dog.
Councillor Sholin had a question on that one.
Thank you. Just back to the Waimarama submission, I'm just wondering, what is the process? You know, someone from the community has taken the time to provide us with this feedback. This might not be the correct place for that, but how do we then feed that into the wider organisation for consideration?
So from that last workshop that we had where we talked about the distribution is only at Havelock North, and it seemed a bit unfair, and what the costs would be to have them distributed throughout the district. The direction was to come back in the next annual plan process and perhaps suggest a cost of doing them everywhere.
Right. Cool. Thank you.
Submission 20, the submitter opposes dogs prohibited from sports parks and opposes dogs on a leash on cycleways. And I guess that was similar to the other one. There are limited areas where dogs are prohibited from, and there's generally pretty good reasons. And again, cycleways is mainly a safety reason one as well.
Had a question from Councillor Nixon. Thank you.
Yeah, a comment as much as anything. The regional council cycleways, the river ones, you get a lot of dogs on there, not on leash, which doesn't particularly worry me, but it seems to be the one area I notice that you get dogs rushing at you. That's under our control, isn't it?
Yes, yeah.
And because I did approach you about one woman that was bitten, you remember, a while back. I mean, how do we deal with it? Do we need a change to deal with it, or we just say it's not a major problem?
I don't think it is a major problem. They're supposed to be on a lead on those areas, but they generally aren't. And what we do find is dog owners tend to do what they think is the right thing, and they're generally right. But it's when it causes another problem. So, for example, if a person was bitten, what we have to do then is do an investigation where we can find out as much and gather as much evidence as we can. A lot of times the problem is not being able to identify who the offender was. And especially when you're talking about cycleways and people walking on there because they're not associated with a vehicle, so we can't get a vehicle registration number to track them back. But again, it's that feedback that we get as to where we'll concentrate our efforts. It's there. As I say, when a dog's not on a lead, attacks are few and far between because it's not a natural default for a dog to attack. Its default is to run away if it can. When it's on a lead, it generally can't.
Thank you.
5.16. Submission 23. Dogs should have to reside at their registered address. I felt there was probably a bit of an underlying situation there that we weren't familiar with, but it's actually written into the legislation that you can have a kept at address and a registered address and a postal address. So that.
We've inadvertently missed a submission. If we could go back to a 1.15, that would be wonderful.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Would like to see a limit on the number of dogs kept on rural properties. So at the moment, there's a limit for urban dogs. You have to have permission if you want to have more than 2, but there isn't a limit for dogs on a rural property, and for obvious reasons. There's lots of multiple ownership for working dogs and things like that. Again, I think there may have been an underlying issue here with a barking dog complaint that the submitter perhaps had, because there's a comment there also about having to have support from the neighbours to lodge a barking dog complaint, and I thought appropriate after this process that we might contact this submitter and find out what the issue is, because it's not correct. We will survey the surrounding neighbours to validate the complaint and to help corroborate that there is an issue going on. But probably half the time when we get a barking dog complaint, it's not really a justified complaint because dogs are allowed to bark and the Act doesn't seek to silence them. It's when the barking's loud and persistent, creating a nuisance. So, and yeah, so obviously there's probably some history behind that one.
Thank you.
517,
Yes.
submission number 24. The submitter would like to, like dogs banned from the equestrian park and also a rule that any attacking dogs be destroyed. I've spoken to the submitter and informed them that basically we can't ban them from that because it's private property. She totally understood. And that in fact, only a district court judge can make the order for destruction. However, a dog in the process of worrying stock can be destroyed by the owner of the stock. And she was quite happy with that outcome. Submission 25, the submitter disagrees with policy 5.2 and states breed-specific legislation does not work. They actually had a number of submissions, that particular submitter, but if we dealt to that one first, 5.2, that's actually set by the legislation. So the government has classified dogs as menacing. It just required in our policy whether we required them to be neutered or not. So that's all that was. So we didn't make the breed-specific legislation. The government did. It's just what we can do with it. Policy 8, the submitter would like to see this expanded to include education regarding dogs and children and adopting the traffic light approach with different coloured collars, leashes, harnesses and bandanas. We're not familiar with what that education address is, but we actually have a little bit of a combination of our own one and the national one that's put out by the Department of Internal Affairs that's been approved for presentation for school children and things like that. So, and it has quite a focus on children and how they approach dogs. We think we've got a pretty robust process. The submitter would like an amendment to policy 10 to improve temperament testing and screening of owners more thoroughly, generally improved need for the adoption process. I was a bit perplexed by that submission because I don't know how they know what our process is, because it's not in the policy, other than that we do a temperament evaluation, but we look a lot also at, I think if you remember, one of the things we added to the policy was potential. So generally a dog is the product of its current environment, and if you put it into a negative environment, it will become a product of that. So what you've got to look at is what does the potential of that dog have. So for example, a Neapolitan Mastiff or a Pit Bull Terrier is a specialist breed dog, and it needs to go with people who know how to handle those types of dogs. So we have a whole process where we marry up those specialist type dogs with specialist type people who might have a background of looking after them well. And then if we can get that marriage, then it's a good adoption. But we can't always get that. And so we're very mindful of a dog with high potential going into the wrong environment. And the last one was the submitter would like the tethering banned altogether. And if you recall, that was another one we put in there in the policy where we just simply said council doesn't support the permanent tethering of dogs. It would be a breach of the Bill of Rights to say you can't do it. So we just simply said you can't. So I don't believe that we would be, I believe that would be a breach of the Bill of Rights. No questions?
No? Oh, Councillor Corbyn?
Sorry, we've gone through them all.
No,
No.
I'm at 5.19.
Thank you.
Submission 27. The submitter does not support the time restrictions on the beaches. I think the time restrictions are in place to ensure that everyone gets fair use of the area. Submission 29, HDC should have an animal disaster plan and work with Animal Evac New Zealand. So we do currently have a business continuity plan, and we would actually be under the direction of MPI, but we would like to look at what that has to offer, that Evac, and as long as it doesn't impact with MPI, we'd be happy to, being prepared is always a good thing.
Councillor Sholom?
Thank you. So, again, my question around that is, I recognise that it's not actually appropriate for this particular meeting to address it, but what are the next steps to take on board that feedback? As you've said, you'd like to investigate it.
Yep,
What's
yep.
the process from there?
So probably the process firstly is to contact MPI, and I have discussed that with the team leader at Animal Control to find out if that's actually even part of it, because it might be part of that. And then if it's not, to find out from MPI if we would be given permission to further explore it.
Brilliant. And is there a process in there, I guess, to loop back to this particular submitter? Because I understand that might take quite a bit of time, but it'd be really great to update the submitter initially saying that that's the next steps, and then also at the end of that process to update them on what the outcome was.
Yes, absolutely.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Councillor Lawson?
Thank you. Just to carry on from what Councillor Sholom was saying, I'm just interested to know if you are aware of any other councils having a similar, emergency or disaster plan.
No, I hadn't heard of the Animal Evac NZ one before, so it might be relatively new. So I think by default, I think councils do fall under MPI for animal welfare issues in a disaster.
Okay, thank you.
And that was the last one.
Can I just make a comment on
Yes.
that last one? So civil defence, communities actually decide about, they talk about evacuation for animals, and we certainly have the discussion over tsunami or earthquake or whatever out on the coast. So our community's fully prepared to pick up their dog and put them in the car, but please not bring them into the evacuation centre.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Travis?
I just want to make a comment, really. I actually thoroughly applaud the sensible nature of our current bylaws. I've been sitting, listening and thinking and reading the submissions, and it occurs to me that people's relationship with their dogs is not unlike, and don't take this amiss, people's relationship with their children. Because in fact people say, but not my child, but my child's an exception. And the bylaws seem to me to be very sensibly arrived at, where the officers actually don't have to make value judgments. It's like the light switch, it's on or it's off. So in certain areas, dogs are on leash. If you were required to make value judgments as to whether a dog was under control or not, then that's kind of a loaded value judgment. And in fact, it could put our officers in a tricky position of then, in due course, being accused of discrimination. You could even, heaven help us, be accused of racism. You could be accused of having differing attitudes in different suburbs. But while our bylaws are so clear that here it's on leash, there it's off leash, then it's really protective, I feel, of our staff. It's just a very, very sensible approach.
Thank you, Councillor Travis. Councillor Watkins?
Oh, thank you, Worship. 31 submissions, it may not seem a big number, but there's a huge amount of work that goes in behind all this, and reviewing the bylaws, John, and the work that you've done, and I just want to acknowledge and thank you for that work.
Thank you, Councillor Watkins. So no further questions on the submissions. Could we have the...
Excuse me, did we do submission 30?
No.
We missed one, sorry.
Yeah.
Submission 30, no dog fee reserves in Havelock North. Can we just put your mic on? Thanks, John.
Sorry. I guess a lot of the focus for animal control is to make the district compatible for dog owners and non-dog owners. We tend to only look at dog prohibited areas when there are reasons for it. For example, it might be ecologically sensitive or something like that. But and like children's playgrounds for safety, we don't have the focus of saying, here's an area where only dog owners can go and here's an area where dogs are not allowed to go. So we always try to get that balance to make it compatible and workable for everybody. And that's probably why we don't have just completely reserves that are no dogs allowed.
Councillor Dixon?
Yeah, thank you, Worship. I was pleasantly surprised to read there was only one submission in support of Tomato Park, of the whole thing, for the liquor ban law. But that was originally came from a suggestion from the police for our two main car parks, because it would give them more power in dealing with any undesirable elements that would be out there. But when they investigated it, it only meant the car park. It didn't mean the summit itself. It didn't meet the side of the road. It didn't meet the tracks. And so that's why the board decided to include the whole of the park. It was mainly health and safety reasons behind that. So, and if anyone really wants to have a wedding in the Redwoods, well, then they can apply for a temporary licence for that particular occasion. Okay.
Councillor Dixon? Councillor Corbett?
Yes, I'd like to talk about submission 30. I think there's actually merit in the submission. Having been an owner of a very friendly dog in a public place, the friendliest of dogs, still the opportunity for that dog to meet and greet people and intimidate them, even bowl them over. In my own experience, walking on the walkway between Bayview and West Shore, come across a family out with their big dog. They call the dog doesn't go back, dog bounds up, bounces on my knee, actually hurts it. And I think correcting things after they're done isn't the right thing to do, because the damage is done at that point, particularly if people are intimidated by dogs or are frail in their health. They are just not going to go to the park if they have an experience like that. So I actually think there's merit in that submission.
Thank you. Any other views? Councillor Lawson? Oh, sorry.
I also think this should have a little further consideration. Havelock is blessed with reserve areas, and I'm really interested in actually, if we were to take this and find a part of Havelock that was dog-free, what's the process, having been out and consulted on this standard as it is? How do we take a small piece and make it dog-free? Do we have to consult again? How do we manage that process going forward?
I would think, in the interest of fairness, if it's going to have a significant impact on residents in a particular area, it would be worth consulting again. Because, you know, they obviously didn't have anything to say because it wasn't identified in the first one. But if you identify a particular area, then I think you should consult around that area.
May I just follow up, Your Worship? I think this would be worthwhile, just going and speaking to the owner in the first instance and understanding if there's something else that we can do that's not as large as taking a piece of reserve. I don't like the fact that people are frightened to use our parks because there may be a dog there. There may be another resolution than what she's asked for.
I think that also with our reserve management plans for the 3 reserves in Havelock North, that could be a consideration, working through that as a part of the reserve management plan for what's coming for those three reserves, because they're the big main reserves. I don't think that's going to impact the bylaw today. Okay, all right, well, we'll follow that up. Councillor Lawson?
Thank you, Your Worship. Look, I have empathy with this submitter. However, I'd just like my memory refreshed. All the reserves in Havelock North on-leash reserves, or some are off-leash?
Yep, they'd be off leash other than like any sports fields or children's play areas.
Okay. So that's interesting. So all of them are off leash, more or less.
So that's, Tarua, Primary, Tena,
Right. Yes, so,
Yes, yeah, they're all in the dog exercise area.
Okay, well, that raises an interesting situation for us to look at.
yes, I think so too. Thank you. Okay, councillor Sholin?
Looking at specifically the consultation we've done for this bylaw, but also more broadly in the past, because I am still a relatively recent in the grand scheme of things councillor. Aside from this submission, how many other submissions have we had requesting dog-free areas anywhere, like completely dog-free?
None that I'm aware of.
Right, so it's just this one submission.
Yeah.
Certainly in the context of today, I don't think we should be taking any action with the bylaw. That's my opinion. As to whether or not we should investigate further through reserve management plans, dog-free reserves, again, I think actioning something like that based on one submission is probably not the best way forward. Potentially what we could ask our parks team to do is when they are working on those reserve management plans, as I understand it, at the start of the process, they generally do a survey, and perhaps we could ask a question about dogs at that point and gauge how big the problem is. As to whether or not we should be introducing more on-lead areas within Havelock North, again, I think that's a conversation for another day and something we'd need to talk to the wider community about before we bring anything formally. I would hate to see one submission see significant change that might impact a community that's otherwise happy. So, but certainly for today, I think I'm satisfied that we take the officer's recommendations today.
Thank you, councillor Sholin. I think that what it has raised though is that we're unsure exactly what is allowed and what is not allowed, and I think that we all should be well informed of what is allowed in reserves in Havelock. And I think that it's very timely with the reserve management plans. Councillor Nixon?
Yeah, thank you. I think it's actually quite a good submission. And once again, if I just come back to the cycle tracks, and I know we're not talking about those, but you do get a lot of dogs rushing you when you're out there riding along. And they seem to see it as a challenge. And so I think to sort of keep up with the cycle, and I suspect for small children and some other people, it's pretty intimidating. So I'm inclined to think we should look, I don't see a bylaw at this stage, but I think it's something we should look at with a view to maybe if we conveniently find some area that is suitable in all the ways it should be, that we look seriously at that, because dogs are pretty intimidating to a lot of people, not to me.
Thank you. I think we just need to bring some more information back about this so we fully understand what is and what isn't allowed. Councillor Dixon?
Yeah, thank you, Wish. I've just been thinking about this with regards to Havelock North. The village green dogs certainly have to be on a leash. Same with all the sports parks in Havelock North, Anderson Park and Guthrie Park. So they are not off-leash areas. So that if a person looked for it, they would certainly be able to find an area where they could go walking where dogs were on leash, but certainly not dog-free. They have to be on leash.
Thank you. Councillor Travers?
I want to endorse Councillor Corbyn's comments actually, because it kind of appalls me that amongst our body of ratepayers, we have people all paying, and yet because of particular bylaws, we have people who are deprived of the enjoyment of facilities that the rest of the community gets. And just because we have had one submission, you know, this is obviously an elderly, frail lady who are probably part of a demographic least likely to probably engage with submission processes. So the suggestion has been made that that we do some surveys, that we consider this as part of our reserve management process, and I think it's a very sensible one because I believe in democracy, and I think that we need to make sure that our processes engage all sectors of society.
Thank you, councillor Travis. Right, so, councillor Watkins.
Oh, I'd just be happy to move the recommendations, Your Worship.
Just wonder if we might put the bylaw up for everyone to see, both bylaws, the consolidated bylaw and the dog policy. So everyone's just well aware. If we've got has everyone seen a copy of this? Okay. It's a little bit hard for everyone to read, is it? It's pretty dense. So we've got a move and a second for these recommendations. Are you comfortable with any other further conversation or debate on the consolidated bylaw? So that is the banning of alcohol in both the crematorium, cemetery and Tamata Park, because we have focused largely on our submissions for dog policy. No further comments on that? Okay, no further comments. I'll put those recommendations. I have a mover and a seconder. No questions? All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you, that's carried. We'll now break for morning. Yes, so I'm happy to move from the chair that we go into PX. Could somebody just explain the PX paper and why we would be going into PX, please?
Your Worship,
Thank you.
I would have a conflict of interest on this, so
Okay, thank you.
I leave the chamber. Is there any further
So do I.
business after this item? Because I'll go home if there's
No further business, thank you. And thank you, councillor Watkins, thank you, councillor Lawson, who have declared a conflict of interest in our next paper. We will break for morning tea. I have moved and I have a seconder, councillor Dixon, but before we just take that motion, I'll ask Mr Cameron to explain why this paper is in PX.
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. The paper relates to ongoing commercial negotiations to be carried out on behalf of the Chief Executive. So involves business information for both council and external parties.
Thank you. Any questions? I'll put that motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any against? Thank you. That's carried. We'll break for morning tea.